Okay, everybody, it's just gone 7. We'll crack on, start tonight's meeting. And we'll start off with apologies for absence and substitutions. I've received apologies from Councillors Crawford and Nijar, and no substitutions.
Councillor Alexander's present on.
Oh, and Councillor Alexander's online. Thank you. Declarations of interest? None. Matters to be considered in private? None. Minutes of the meeting held on the 20th of April. So that was last week. So they're not available yet, are they?
No. That's right. Yeah.
That's from last week. Okay, they'll come to the next whole week ago. I know they'll come to the next OSC meeting. So we'll go straight on to the main item on the agenda, which is the approach to scrutiny for 2023-2024. There's a paper on some suggested thoughts for next year. I'm going to ask Sam to introduce it.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So just looking back at this year briefly, so the approach to scrutiny this year is that we made some steps towards moving away from the sort of scrutiny review panel model that we've had for many years, to better align scrutiny to the council's strategic priorities. When we were sort of this time last year, when we were looking at choosing the topics, it was pre-election. If you can think back to that time, I'm sure you can all remember that. Pre-election time, and the proposed topics that we were looking at were closely aligned to the Labour Party's local manifesto. And following that, after the Labour Party won the election, this then became the council's strategic plan. I mean, many of you around the table tonight chaired those panels, and I think the general feeling I get, it has been relatively successful to sort of align with those priorities, and we want to build on that for next year. So to wrap up for this year, we will be taking final panel reports to Cabinet early in the next municipal year after they've gone to scrutiny. And then we'll also take an annual scrutiny report to council next year, covering all of the work that scrutiny has got up to. Something we've not done for a little while, and we should be doing. Looking forward to next year and the panel selection for next year. One thing to note, I think, and one thing to sort of take on is there has been a lot of change in senior management in the council this year. We've got 6 new strategic directors, or 6 newly appointed strategic directors, I should say, because a couple are internal or sort of internal appointments. And they've been recruited to deliver the administration's the council's corporate priorities, included in the council plan. So the document presented to you tonight, therefore, largely proposes we align the scrutiny bodies that we have to the strategic directorships. However, there's 3 very slightly different approaches presented to you in that paper. The first is to align it strictly with the 6 strategic directorates. So each strategic director will be assigned a scrutiny body. So whether that's overview and scrutiny committee, or the 4 panels, or the standing health panel, and we'll keep it very strictly aligned to the strategic directorates. And then there's like an option 2A and 2B. And the idea of that one is that we would place the resources strategic directorate and the strategy and change strategic directorate and align those to overview and scrutiny committee, because for obvious reasons they are very they are the directorates that sort of support the council services across the council, and therefore would fit quite well with the overview side of the overview and scrutiny committee, which would then leave the other strategic directors which have within their portfolios of services that often have things that members have a lot of interest in, give them each a scrutiny panel, and then we've got a final scrutiny panel. I'm calling it scrutiny panel 4. It doesn't have to be scrutiny panel 4. We can play around with which one it's going to be next year, to do a bit more in-depth work on topics that are of particular importance or interest to the borough. The 2 topics suggested there are the council's partnership working, and the other one, which is trust and confidence in the police and crime and disorder issues. I think out of those 2 suggestions, I think the crime and disorder one is probably the stronger one of the 2. We have had a real willingness from the police to engage with the council and with councillors, to really hold them to account around trust and confidence in the police locally. They really want to engage with us, so I think it's a great opportunity to do a bit of groundbreaking work. I'm going to the London Scrutiny Network tomorrow, so I'm going to see how groundbreaking it is compared to other boroughs. But I have always been impressed by the engagement the local police have here with Scrutiny. So let's build on that, and hopefully that it'll be a good panel to run. If we did go with that option, then the idea is we would also sort of hand over the OSC's statutory responsibility for the crime and disorder meeting that we hold. So the meeting you had last week, we'd hand that over to that panel as well, because it would fit quite well with the other subject matter it's doing. And we, hopefully by the time it would be taking that report, there'd be kind of subject matter experts that the members sitting on that panel would be able to really be able to engage even more on those issues and really give it a good going over in terms of scrutiny. And then that panel could also perhaps look at some of the council services, because there are some things that is the council's responsibility when it comes to crime and disorder, things like antisocial behaviour. Maybe when we had an item on environmental crime, I think last year or the year before. So it'd be things like that we could also do a bit of scrutiny on, as how is the council addressing crime and disorder as well within the borough. So I think that is probably the stronger of the two. The partnership working one, it was a suggestion. I don't think there's probably enough in there to have a whole year's worth of meetings, but I thought it was interesting to put it on there, something to discuss or think about if members wanted to have a think about that. That would be looking at things like the Safe Reading Partnership again, but maybe looking into that and seeing what others do. The local strategic partnership, which is the partnership of the council with local voluntary sector and other public sector bodies, and how those work. As I say, I think that's not as strong as the crime and disorder panel, but I thought it was worth putting in there. It was an interesting suggestion. And then finally, with the new approach to scrutiny that we're suggesting, or the incrementally new, we're sort of changing it up every year a little bit. That will work more closely with strategic directors. I think there's a recognised need, which I think some of you who are around the table who've been chairing panels this year have identified, that we want to make the recommendations a lot more swiftly and not have to go through the whole sort of bureaucratic, taking it to scrutiny first, then off the cabinet and whatever. So this will require maybe a few minor constitutional changes and some discussions around how we deal with those internally. And it's not something I can put on the table tonight, but discussions are ongoing about how they'll work with the executive and with those in scrutiny as well. So we'll be able to discuss those and get something arranged ready for the new municipal year before the first round of panel meetings. So I think that gives an overview as to the content of that paper and gives some more context to some of the ideas within it. And I'll hand that to the chair to make some more comments if you'd like to, Chair.
Thank you, Sam. Well, I think we've been given a steer in what we think the most interesting structure will be. But I was going to maybe open up to the room if anyone's got any comments on how the panels have functioned this year, and then also going forward and with the slight change in direction that we're thinking of. Councillor Ball.
Yeah, it's interesting that the approach that's being proposed here of having more thematic panels rather than sort of task and finish panels looking at one particular item. It's something that was done 20 years ago or something. It's something that the council has done previously, but I think not many members around the table were here. Do you remember those? The study panels? Sure. No, because maybe the only one. But I'm not going to say what I did at Full Council on Tuesday, that it was terrible and we shouldn't go back to it. I think it worked okay. The difficulty was, after a number of years, they kind of ran out of steam a bit, because they kind of ended up talking about the same things. But I think, for this year and, see how it goes for the following years, I think it's fine to go for this sort of pattern. In terms of the options, I think we saw with the two meetings that we've had with the police that there's a great deal of questions, there's a great deal of material to talk to them about, and also there is very much unfinished business in terms of the Met trying to regain the confidence of the public. So I think there's a lot of content in there. So I think it would make sense for that to be scrutiny panel 4. What was I going to say? And I think, oh yes, that's it really. I mean, the only other thing I would say is just it is helpful if the panel numbers can get fixed at a fairly early stage, because otherwise what tends to happen at the last minute, suddenly the numbers and subjects change, and it's hard for people to both work out the diaries and also do what they're interested in. So if that locks down a bit earlier, that would be good. Okay, thanks.
Thank you very much. Councillor Newstub.
I just want to be clear. I mean, I think absolutely crime deserves its own panel. That seems perfectly sensible. Is that a suggestion that the statutory responsibilities be designated to that panel? So as a complete OSC, we won't be looking at the police and a Safer Ealing partnership in the same way as a panel. I wonder if that leaves a bit of a deficit, because I think last week's meeting was really strong. And sort of leading on to that is that, and this partly might be my relative newness as a councillor, not really having been through the cycle once, as OSC, I'm not on a panel, there's very little connection. And I know we'll get reports, and I know they're trying to move to more of a ad hoc recommendation, but I would welcome your thoughts on more connection between the panels and the overall scrutiny committee, in terms of, I don't know, just be updates or this is my plan for the year, or, because there's nothing. I mean, I'm sure you're all doing great work, but I have absolutely no idea. I mean, I do, because I've watched them online because I'm a nerd, but there isn't any sort of, there's no correlation. So really, I know you're trying to move away from a report at the end of the year that's a sort of done deal, but even so, some traction between the panels and the oversight, the main committee would be really useful.
So I think on the first point about the crime and disorder side of stuff, the statutory responsibilities, we put in the crime and disorder meeting as an additional meeting in the year, so it's not one of the meetings that could also take a call in. So what we would do is just remove that one. It gives you a 13th meeting essentially, so we would remove that out of the diary, so it wouldn't necessarily cause any issues in terms of scheduling things in the work programme for OSC. But I get what you're saying, in that there are probably members on this panel, on this committee, that have, seen the Safe Running Partnership reports year after year, and you understand that. I don't think you'd necessarily lose that from moving it over to a panel, because actually the panel would probably have some of those members on anyway, firstly, and secondly, the time of the year it comes, which is sort of towards the end of the year, they will have had 3 meetings, maybe some site visits, and really got to grips with the detail. So I feel like that would actually probably enhance the scrutiny of that bit of work than detract from it, because in general, I get that overviewing scrutiny probably has quite an interest in that. It is a really interesting bit of work to do, but I do think in terms of enhancing the scrutiny of that and really having because usually it comes just once a year and then it's done and that's it. You don't hear about it again. But actually, this is a lot more in depth. So I think it will do a better job of scrutinising that bit of work. On the question of sort of connection with overviewing scrutiny, I think you've probably got quite a good point there in terms of the members of overviewing scrutiny committee who aren't chairs or vice chairs of panels. Because behind the scenes, what you don't see when you're not in the meetings is we do have the quarterly work programme meeting where everyone updates everybody on what they've been up to and what's coming up in the next however long. We are planning to have the annual scrutiny report, which we're going to be taking to council every year, which will sum up everything that scrutiny has done throughout the year. But I do recognise that there is, perhaps a for those who are on the committee but aren't a chair or vice chair and aren't involved in that work that goes on behind the scenes, that there may be a bit of a deficit there. And I would welcome any suggestions about what we could do about that. I think that we did, a few years ago, we did used to have an item on the agenda for panel members to update everybody on what they've been up to. But it became quite formulaic. I think those who were around the table, it was just a bit of, we've done a few, and it's all stuff that you could find, as you say, if you've watched the webcasts or whatever. So, I would welcome suggestions on how to do that, but what I wouldn't want to do is just be repeating stuff that could be found elsewhere. But whether I can just add some links to reports or something, I don't know. But whatever you'd find helpful to plug that gap.
I mean, it may be well that, which is why I prefaced that by saying maybe this is me being a relatively new councillor, but it is a slightly odd thing where some of your colleagues go off and do something that feels a bit, not secretive, but elsewhere. And then as the overall committee, you're just like, well, I don't know what they've been up to. It's just joining that gap a bit. And I don't want to be repetitive or take up otherwise valuable time, but it would be helpful if we could have a little bit more connection.
Yeah, I mean, any suggestions on how to do that, and we could bring back the standing item on chairs and vice chairs reporting of what their panels have been up to as well, if we wanted to, if that was something everyone wanted to do. It's not it's not an issue, but yeah, there are maybe other things we can do as well. So maybe if anyone else feels strongly about it as well, then we can have a chat outside of this, and we can or we can do it here. I don't mind.
You could ask tomorrow at your conference.
Yeah.
You could say, see what suggestions there are. But yeah.
Councillor Summers next.
Yeah, hi. I totally echo the points Councillor Ball made about identifying the panels as soon as possible. I mean, now may be almost too late, because I know, when it comes to the Labour AGM, those papers might be coming out very soon, and we'll already, you're basically asking people which panel do you want to sit on or chair without knowing what they are. And it's always much better to have people on a panel who really are interested in that subject. I mean, obviously most councillors should be interested in all the subjects that the council we're working on, but you're going to have particular things you're more interested in than others, and maybe have some background knowledge or whatever. So I totally agree with that. And on the police and crime and disorder panel, it makes total sense. I tend to agree with Sam and disagree with Councillor Newsome about taking it away from OSC. I think it will. It's become such a big issue at the moment with the Met that I think it definitely needs a panel of his own to look at it. And if that takes it away from the OSC, so be it. But like you say, it usually comes right at the end of the calendar year. That's almost sort of too late, really. So there was another point I was going to make, but it can't have been that important. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Summers. Councillor Anson.
Thank you. I think Councillor Newsome made a lot of points I was going to make, actually. I think on the crime, firstly, I agree that I think we should move to mirroring the strategic directorates. I think that makes total sense. I think on the crime point, I agree that it should be it should have its own panels. I think the various authorities that are, or bodies that are responsible for keeping us all safe should be monitored throughout the year and held accountable. I think there's probably middle way, in the sense that we probably have its own panel that meets periodically throughout the year, but also there's kind of a broader strategic piece that the OSCE could scrutinise. I think we could probably have best of both worlds. I think I am a bit nervous about the OSCE not having any scrutiny role on the most kind of basic part of kind of society. What was the other point I was going to make? I think also on the coordination, I think we probably don't need to make it too complicated as far as having it standard items. I think it's just a case of sending an email to all councillors saying, in the next quarter, this is what each of the panels are doing. I don't think we need to make too much work for us. I think it's just sending an email to everyone, is regardless of whether you're on a panel or not, or on a committee, that this is what various colleagues are looking at. So that actually, if you're not on a panel or committee, you could say, actually, this is an issue in my ward or my part of town. Would you mind looking into it a bit more? And I guess my only question really was with regards to the partnership working. To what extent, and I think we've kind of answered that there, kind of answered in the initial comments, is there, to what extent, how much partnership working are we doing that it would actually warrant its own panel? Because that's kind of an open question, because I have no idea.
Councillor Rice.
Thank you. Yes, I suppose just one thing that just I will just say is that hopefully we have it very clear to scrutiny chairs as to what's expected from them, because this year, as I've said before, it did get a little bit kind of like, well, we supposed to get the recommendations together, but we weren't quite sure what the process was, and even talking to some of the officers weren't quite sure what the process was of getting those looked at. Looking at everyone's talking about the crime and disorder. Now, one thing that I'm thinking in terms of is that if it went to another panel, we might be more likely to get some fresh perspectives on. Because thinking about myself, I mean, last week, sorry, might have been the 5th time I've done it. So there might be maybe get some more new people on to actually get some new ideas for that. That would be probably quite helpful. I suppose just one question I will have is looking at housing and environment and trying to understand what that covers, because I know when that was discussed before, just thought that's quite a large area. In terms of, is it just like 2 different subjects in terms of housing and the whole of the environment, or are we maybe looking at maybe the environmental aspects of housing, which could be maybe where housing is situated, or does it mean other environmental aspects in terms of what we might be doing, talk about in my panel in terms of recycling building materials, or is there, I mean, just to try to understand, is that really just how big a panel is that, and just how broad that really covers, and if that really is going to be doable and feasible. Thank you.
Yeah, so just coming back to Councillor Anderson's point about whether we could take perhaps the Safe Reading Partnership report here, but also have the crime and disorder panel. It is up to members. What I would say is that we also just have to be careful about duplication and bringing people in too often. Part of the way I sold this was, if we had a crime and disorder panel and the police would come along and talk to us about trust and confidence, we could put the Safe Reading Partnership report in there as well, and you won't have to come twice. So, we just have to be mindful of burden on officers who are also trying to deliver as well as be scrutinised. It's important they do get scrutinised, but we just need to be careful we're not asking them to duplicate. So if we can find a way of doing it without duplicating, great. But I think if we put it in one place and make it really clear as to where it goes, I think that has its advantages. Councillor Rice's point about, sorry, what was the point? Sorry, I've lost my train of thought now.
Which one is the housing environment?
Yes, that's it, sorry, housing environment. So very simple, that one is matching, it matches the roles and responsibilities of the Strategic Director of Housing and Environment. I'll read out the directors or areas underneath that, which is in the staff structure. They are landlord services, housing development, homelessness, waste and recycling, transport, highways and parking, and safety communities. So they're all really, really meaty things, massive. But what I would say about that is very much for the chair, vice chair of the panel and the strategic director to work together to come up with a work program that suits the big issues that are coming up in the next year in those areas, and ensure it's done properly. Now, there are things that are on that list of things, I would say, that may actually be better suited to go to overview and scrutiny. And we'll just have to work very closely with the chair of that panel to make sure that if it's a more, I want to say siloed, it's probably not the right word, but it's an issue that's sort of contained within the service. Maybe that's something that panel would look at, but if it's something that maybe has a wider risk to the council or something that's a bit more cross-cutting, then that would have to be referred to overview and scrutiny committee, I feel. So I think there is a way of managing some of those bigger subjects. But again, I just have to remind us all that we've also got to, there's only one strategic director for that area. We've just got to be mindful of, ensuring we scrutinise officers, but also we don't end up overloading them and taking them away from delivery.
I think also Councillor Rice's point about the recommendations and getting clarity, because I know that's what we wanted to do this year. It needs a constitutional change. But if we can sort of accelerate that, it will then tie into Councillor Newstub's point about feedback, because the recommendations are coming through the system and it will be reported, assumed to Cabinet. So we'll get to hear about that, maybe not directly at this meeting or the equivalent of this meeting, but that will just keep up the engagement across OSC, but across the council as a whole, what the panels are doing. So there's some opportunity there. Councillor Driscoll.
Thanks, Chair. I do like this sort of structured approach now, and although it's geared to directorates, the opportunity to focus at key issues. I think as long as that's borne out, because it's fundamentally, we might have a different title, but they always are hiding with directorates. So it's a different way of tackling it. The panel 4, if we call it the crime, it's kind of diminishing that scope of the partnership, the Safe Reading Partnership, because it's health issues, it's drug, alcohol, it's a whole range of different tasks. And I always thought at OSC, the way it's parachuted in at the end of the year, and then it comes the next year and it's parachuted in, you don't really see a development of what's going on. And given how a lot of the policing issues are very current, but there's so much overlap with health, drug issues and sort of health issues, and the police at the meeting said, we're drawn into a lot of mental health issues when we shouldn't be there. But I think that could be quite an innovative way of monitoring it, exploring it in greater depth and probing more than you do as a one-off once a year. And then we ask the same questions, which then get presented in a similar way the following year, but you don't get that traction in between. So I think that could be really positive. I do see the point about not wanting to duplicate, but I suppose it's looking at the recommendations from that, because that would have to recommend something, and that's where we're not duplicating the discussion, but that's where it gets reviewed at this panel, and maybe that's how it comes in, and maybe it might be broader than, because it tends to be the police come and get questioned, and other areas are very minor. So I think that could be a good way of going for that. So in broad, I think it's a good way of approaching it. My only concern is like the children's, because I mean, the notes mentions like that improvement journey. I think it was November 2019 when we had the Ofsted report, and in the following 2021 year, we had the scrutiny panel. I think there's been a lot of housekeeping done on the website, and you can't see all the historical scrutinies, but from memory, that's right. So there has been a scrutiny panel on that Ofsted report and the outcomes already. So I mean, children's is a big area, but that's already been done. And while it's still an ongoing process, there's been a lot of work on that as well. That's my only sort of caveat.
Yeah, thanks. Sorry, I didn't mean to diminish the work that colleagues in Children's Services have done. I know that they have made a lot of improvements and changes since then. It was more just for a bit of context, really. That's where we've been the last few years. But I know we're in a better place now. But I do think that it's one of those areas that is, reputationally high risk for the council if things don't go right, and if we've got an opportunity to just assure ourselves that we are continuing that journey and we're keeping those high standards up, then I think that's something that scrutiny should be doing. The way I think about things like this, maybe it's an overly cautious way, but I always think if something goes wrong later on down the line, reputation for the council, and scrutiny has been looking at it, that's one of the first questions that gets asked. Who was scrutinizing it? Who was why was this not picked up at an earlier basis? So I think that's why it's really important that we have that sort of oversight of the council services. And I think say Children's Services it is a big area of work. It's also a really interesting area of work, and as we are also on Tuesday night, it's one of those areas of work that it can be very difficult to deal with, but also can have those moments of it being really, really a nice thing to be involved in as well. So I think that could be quite an interesting panel. And again, it goes back to my comments though, that we just need to be careful we're not overburdening officers who are delivering, but I think 4 panels for a strategic director, 4 panel meetings for strategic director every year is probably about the right balance. So
just to say, of course, we have corporate parent as well, so being mindful of that duplication of the role there, because that does receive reports, and especially about the Ofsted reports have gone there, and also progress and work that's ongoing during the year. So there is a role that's already regular each year, so that's already in train.
I don't see any more hands, so I think we'll proceed to a conclusion. So we're asked to recommend one of the options, and I think the meeting is quite clear that they favour the crime option, which I think is option 2A. So I'm going to formally recommend we adopt option 2A. Is that agreed? Agreed. That's agreed by the meeting. Thank you very much. We will take on board all the points, and particularly the numbering and the speed of everyone knowing their numbering. I don't think that's going to be too big a piece of work. I think we have
Sorry, that was one thing I thought to come back on. Yes, I'll do what I can to get that done quickly. I do remember there was some issue last year. We did number them and then there was people to swap around or something. I can't remember what it was. So I'll just have a quick chat with the political assistants tomorrow to find out what the issue was, just to make sure that I'm not overcommitting. But yeah. So
Okay. Let's be honest, it was because it was a new administration, new chairs, new councillors, so we wanted to rejig it. This will be set in stone much earlier. Great, thank you very much. That's the end of the meeting. Now, the date of the next meeting formally is in July, but we do possibly have a call-in meeting on the 17th of May, and we'll know by Tuesday, end of play on Tuesday, whether that's going to happen. And if Councillor Board has any thoughts, if that, but I'm not going to put you on the spot, but
yes, I don't think we will be having a call in, which means this is the last meeting of the municipal year. So I'd just like to move a vote of thanks, Chair, in all that you've done to the efficient and fair way you've run these meetings, and also the Board of Scrutiny process over the year.
Thank you very much, Councillor Board. Thank you to everybody in the committee. It's been a good year, and we'll see what happens next year. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, thanks.